Now, for our final session this afternoon, it's unfortunately George Carlo was meant to be here through cyberspace to join us from America, but through various circumstances has not been able to join us today. However, I'm glad to report that Paul Waddell, who was going to do the majority of the show anyway, has been in close contact with George, and together they've put together a joint sort of presentation with Paul taking over most of it. So let me introduce Paul. He began his working life as an aircraft engineer with Air New Zealand and has held senior management roles in technical sales, marketing and information technology, and has also been a successful business owner. Several years ago, Paul decided to focus on helping people to live more safely with modern technology. He completed a certificate course in EMF testing with the Australian College of Environmental Studies and now operates a consultancy called Safe Space. Paul now consults to homeowners, architects, businesses, testing and providing practical remediation solutions against the negative health issues caused by electro-pollution. So thank you, Paul. Take the show.
I must say it's a real honour to be invited to address such a large body of people, and I think the first thing I have to say is an apology from George. He really did want to be involved in this, but it's his son's wedding this weekend, and so he definitely sent his best wishes, and he did say that he would be very keen to have a follow-on session where possibly I talk more about what I normally talk about, which is how I do measurements, how I do remediation and things like that, and then he would follow on with the very latest science. I'm going to try and encompass some of that today. Is there really a cause for concern? Okay, so the first thing is what is electro-pollution? And typically we're looking at, and one of the very first forms of electro-pollution that came to the fore was Wertheimer and Lima. In, I think it was the 70s, they found increased childhood leukemia around power lines. And so typically we're finding AC magnetic fields around high voltage power lines. And if I ever find that in building wiring, that would indicate there is actually a fault in the building, or fault in the wiring. AC electric fields, and wherever there is electricity in a wire, you have an AC electric field. And this is at 50 hertz, so it's actually changing 100 times a second. You're going from positive to negative at a cyclic rate of 50 times a second, so we've actually got 100 changes a second. And where we find that is in building wiring and appliances. Next is microwave radiation, and this is probably the most topical, probably the most talked about form of electro-pollution, and pulsed and modulated data transmission through the air. And so we're talking about cell towers, cell phones, cordless phones, Wi-Fi, wireless baby monitors, anything that is transmitting through the air, Bluetooth headsets. And then the fourth kind is called dirty electricity, which is kind of sits halfway in between. It's, in effect, it is transients, which are little voltage spikes on the AC line, but also it creates harmonics which go right up into the high frequency ranges. And to give you an idea of what, it's probably easier to show you what it looks like rather than to explain it. So the top part of the graph up here is a oscilloscope trace showing, we've got about 50 GS, and we measure dirty electricity with a Stetsometer, which is just a very simple little meter we plug in, and it gives a number. And optimal is less than 35. OK is 50, so this is a little bit above optimal, and you can see that there are a certain number of transients, the voltage spikes up and down. At the bottom, we're looking at the spectrum analysis of those voltage transients, and the very first number here, number 1, the little vertical line there, I'm a bit shaky, but that's at 1.7 kilohertz, and the important aspect of that is that research, particularly in Russia, I believe, and this is to do with Russian weapons research, they found that, and this was given to me by Dave Stetzer, who is the guy that has helped develop a market, it's the Stetsometer and the Stetso filters, to correct this. What they found was that above 1.7 kilohertz, the energy from these transients goes internally into the body and affects the biological system. So 1.7 kilohertz is quite an important point. And the meter basically roughly is equivalent, at 50 it's equivalent roughly to about 1.7 kilohertz. So this is where we're looking at 70, and we're seeing some frequency spilling out beyond that. So now if we look at a worse situation, and now you see the difference of these transients. The top area, we've got massive increase in the transients, the movement and the voltage, but also if we look at down here, we're also getting really big spikes further out. This second spike here is about 13 kilohertz, 26 kilohertz. And now the way that we remediate this is by putting in filters, and we put in filters and they go back to looking more like the original side. But the kind of comments I get from people is that when you plug in the filters, the whole environment feels like it calms down. And it's for some people, it's really palpable. They really feel it. And this is something that can be in everybody's home. And you only know if you measure. Okay, so electric and magnetic fields. Let's talk about where we've come from, how we've evolved. We've, as a species, as a planet, we've had extremely long wave electromagnetic fields for a long time. ELF is extremely low frequency. And we've also had a lot of extinction events as the planet's developed. And one of the things that they look at is that we've actually had switches of the magnetic poles. North has become south, south has become north. And there is some possible evidence that this is linked into extinction events. And the interesting thing is actually it's due to change over again at some stage, and possibly reasonably soon. I don't know whether that's within the next million years or whatever, but let's hope, let's hope. And the frequency range that we've evolved in is somewhere between 0 and 80 hertz. So, and some of these the wavelength of some of these very low frequency waves can be up to 6,000 kilometers long. This is very, very long, big waves. And the other thing is lightning. Lightning is about 10 to 20,000 kilohertz. And as we've said before, the most biologically active, harmful range is when it's between 1.7 kilohertz and 100. And I believe that above 100 kilohertz, it's something to do with the cell signaling. So beyond that, I don't think it affects so much. And alternating current, which we've had since the 1880s, invented by Nikola Tesla, these are very, very unnatural. We're DC beings. It's a DC planet predominantly. And so people seem to be really badly affected by this. And what I find when I'm doing my testing is that more people, I find a lot of people are quite badly affected by electric fields. And this is a bit of a graphical representation of what we evolved with. You can see there's a little bit there, and this is what we now live in. We're crowding up the spectrum, and I suspect that this was from a book from the 80s, and I suspect that the amplitude of those bars would be significantly higher now. It's growing dramatically all the time. And you know, one of the things that we sort of look at is like, how long have we actually known about this stuff? And this is a report from 1971. US military, it's fairly recently been declassified and rediscovered. But in this report, from 1971, this is the range of symptoms and diseases and illnesses that we knew about in 1971. And you know, I'll let you take that in. There's quite a lot there. And so let's now talk a little bit about microwave. We talked a little bit about electric fields and magnetic fields, microwave radiation. So we're talking about cell phones, Wi-Fi, cordless phones. Smart meters are another, in my opinion, plague that people are being exposed to. And there's really a number of people that have have a smart meter installed, and almost immediately they're having very, very bad chronic health effects. Wireless baby monitors, I think, are criminal. And it's basically information transfer through the ear. And what we look at and what we talk about when we're talking about cell phone is we talk about frequencies. We talk about, I think 4G from telecom is about 850 megahertz. Vodafone is 920 something megahertz, and also 1.8 and 2.1 gigahertz. And Wi-Fi is 2.45, and now we're going to get a lot more 5.8 gigahertz Wi-Fi coming in soon. And that's the carrier frequency. What is possibly, or what I think is doing the damage to people and the environment, is that combined with that, we have these low frequency modulations, and this is how the information is embedded into the carrier. And typically these modulations are only at between 2 and 50 hertz. So, and this is sort of what it looks like. So you have the signal that you want to send. This is the data or the voice or whatever you're trying to send by microwave radiation. And you've got your carrier signal, which that might be, if we're talking about Vodafone, that'll be maybe 923 megahertz. And this is amplitude modulation, and that's how the information is put onto that wave to then be transmitted through the ear. But that's not all. At the same time, the signal's also pulsed. And so pulsing means that the signal is periodically interrupted. And so this is a whole nother dynamic that comes into this stuff. And pulse frequencies, it's a little bit difficult, this without going to spending a lot of time on this, I won't sort of explain the diagram at the bottom too much, but the main pulse frequencies for the packets of data are 8.3 hertz and 1.73 kilohertz. And then to achieve multiple connections, and you can have up to 7 cell phones talking on one channel to a cell phone tower at one time, they then chop it up even further. And so we've got another pulse signal at 217 hertz. So it's not just the modulation, but it's also these pulses that are embedded or embedding the data into the signal. And anybody notice anything interesting about those frequencies? They're all close to either the biological frequency that we've evolved with, or they're in a biologically active range. And I don't know whether this is by design or what, but this, to some degree, is the reason why we're responding badly to these things. Some of the research they did fairly early on, when they were just a pure wave, unmodulated, unpulsed, they weren't getting significant health impacts or physical impacts, but it's when you modulate it and when you pulse it, that seemed to be when all the rats started dying and all the other things started happening. And so this is a very important part of how it works. Okay, so that's basically what I said. And all organisms will have a stress response to these artificial frequencies. And we also, I think one of the things I wanted to also put across is that, and I'm sure you guys know this anyway, but we're all bioelectric. We have an ionic system, which we'll talk about a little bit further on, and this is where George Carlo is doing work in this area. And it's sort of the realm of mechanistic chemical medicine. We also have a digital electrical system, and this is what causes the transfer of information through our bodies, not necessarily in the nervous system, but near the nervous system. And we also have an analog electric field around us. And we have a positive potential in the brain and the nerves down the spine. And the further we get away from that area, out into the limbs, we actually have a negative potential. And when Dr. Robert Becker found this, his theory was that there would be a very subtle electromagnetic field around the body. And it took almost 20 years before a squid machine was developed that could actually measure it. And sure enough, they measured that. And he then theorized that this is how we interact with the planet, the Earth's electromagnetic fields, which are also very fine and possibly could explain to some degree intuition and how intuition works in animals even. These very, very subtle electromagnetic fields seem to work together. And we also have piezoelectricity in the body, which particularly in the bones and collagen fibres, and this indicates we're more of a crystalline structure. And our body electrical systems have characteristics closer to a solid state system with semiconductor attributes. And now, this possibly may explain to some degree why we react also and why we're such a great antenna for this stuff, because a solid state device is a stereo. You know, we have very, very close ties to the things that are actually affecting us. And this is my statement. I guess, how can we be so arrogant to think that with all these very, very fine millivolts, microamps, that we can bombard ourselves with these incredibly strong external forces and have no effect? I think it just beggars belief to me, actually. That stuff was out of these books by Dr. Robert Becker. They're from the 70s and 80s. I've just finished reading all three of them. And if you're interested in this area, they're terrific, terrific books. Very, very interesting. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do now is to use your imagination a little bit. Imagine that there's three people sitting in your waiting room by your consulting room to see you. And the first is a young girl who is about 6 years old. She wakes up with headaches, is very, very grumpy. Her teachers have noticed that there's an issue with her. She uncooperative at school. She's a little bit aggressive, and over time her schooling has really suffered. You know, she's not behaving in class the way she would. Second person is a lady in her late 40s. She is getting headaches, memory loss, heart palpitations. Third person is a lady in her early 60s who is prone to very, very rapid drop in blood sugar, to the point where a couple of times she's actually collapsed. How would you treat these people? I won't ask you to say that out loud, but I'll tell you what I found. For the 6-year-old girl, she was sleeping with her head very, very close to electrical wiring in the wall, and the house had massive amounts of dirty electricity. We cleaned up the dirty electricity, moved her bed 1.5 meters away from the wall, and she went back to waking up the very, very happy, healthy little girl, very cooperative and quite a bright spark at school. The lady with the headaches and the heart palpitations, she worked from home and part-time, and she had a desk at home, and she had a cordless phone on one side of the monitor, she had a Wi-Fi router on the other side of the monitor, and she actually had a thing called a Sure Signal, which is a cell phone repeater. And all of this together would add up to 60, 80, 100,000 microwatts per square metre of microwave radiation. We took all that away, headaches gone, heart palpitations gone, concentration better. The third lady is a really interesting case. She's very, very electrosensitive, and that instance where she collapsed was actually her doctor sent her to Auckland Hospital to go to the diabetes clinic to be checked out, and she walked in the door there and collapsed. And they called a crash cart. The electro-pollution in that area was so bad that it actually dropped her. And this is the diabetes clinic of Auckland Hospital. So I guess what I'd like to convey to you is that, you know, I would really ask you to consider the environmental effects that this is creating on your patients and the people you come into contact with. Okay, so causes and effect. Generally depressed immune system, sleep problem. These are the kind of things that I see and people talk to me about. I don't prescribe, of course, but I look at their situation. Anybody that does live blood analysis will know, see that. Reduced ability to concentrate, and this can be a really big one for people. Headaches, and if there's high electric fields involved, and I'll give you an example of this. Apple notebooks, at one stage they were incredibly bad. The highest voltage I ever measured touching the metal surface of an Apple Mac notebook was 105 volts AC, touching this laptop. And that then generates a current up the arm and across the chest, and currents of greater than 18 microamps are implicated in cancer. And I think, I didn't actually measure this, but one other instance I've seen where we've measured something like that, we're getting 60, 80 microamps of current running up a person's arm from contact with things like that. And this is something you can do if you've got access to this kind of equipment. If even just putting your foot on a power extension lead for 5 minutes, and then you'll find that there'll be some rouleau effect generally. Use a cell phone or a cordless phone. Often you'll get this as well. Okay, so let's talk about, this is, we're really getting more into the area that I'm a little bit uncomfortable, so if I make any mistakes in this, please bear with me. But it's more than 40 years that there's been, this EMF is known to cause breaches in the blood-brain barrier. So one of the main people doing this is Dr. Leif Selford, and has done a lot of work with rats, and he's a neurosurgeon. And one quote from him is, he believes that this is the world's largest uncontrolled experiment, and I tend to agree with him. Demonstrates that it occurs at levels much lower than a cell phone. And this is what I thought was really interesting. He found that the biological window for opening up the blood-brain barrier was at 1,000th or 1/10,000th of a normal cell phone. And they used GSM as Vodafone 900 and 1.8 gigahertz phones for this. And they found that the short-term exposure caused memory impairment, genetic damage, and other biological effects. And this is a shot of one of the controls, and there's a little bit of albumin leakage down the bottom, which is apparently very normal. And this was after 2-hour exposure. And I'm hoping that you understand what that means. And at that very, very low level, that's equivalent to a SAR of 1 milliwatt per kilogram, and that's the equivalent of having a cell phone 1.85 meters away from you. And so one of the things that he was sort of talking about was that passive exposure could potentially be quite harmful in this. And as we've talked about, and equivalent to roughly about 200 meters away from a cell phone tower at the same kind of rate. And those at risk, definitely unborn children, but also babies, children, and this is where, you know, it makes me cringe to see people handing kids cell phones that have got teething cases on them and things like this. It just drives me nuts. And another thing that was really interesting, they found that up to 50 days afterwards, there was significant damage to neurons, and it didn't actually, the neuron damage didn't actually come in until considerably later on. And that was just with a 2-hour exposure. And if you're interested to watch this video, which is it's a really good video, if you YouTube that, electromagnetic fields and leakage of the blood-brain barrier, that's where I got it from. Okay, so changes to melatonin production. You'll know all this kind of stuff. But some of the research they found was when the exposure to, especially electromagnetic radiation, was during the day and during work and at home, there was a significant increase. And one test they did was you're just using ordinary electric blankets, which is something that I really don't recommend anybody use unless you turn them off at the wall before you get into bed. I measure sometimes up to 60, 80 volts on an electric blanket, which is very, very high. And they found that 25% of these subjects had significant reduction in melatonin just using electric blanket. And there was a definite dose-response relationship. And that's, you know, they were finding issues with roughly 25 minutes of cell phone use. Calcium efflux and influx. Okay, so again, you guys should understand this probably way, way better than I do. But they've definitely found that electro-pollution increases the number of calcium ions that leak from the cells in the membranes, and this has some physical response to brain time and response to behaviour and brain response, and linked to a lot of other neurological diseases, Alzheimer's, whatever, cancer. And also they found calcium ion influx reduces apoptosis and allows the damaged cells to survive longer than they really should, which is also a toxic condition. Stress response. I'll classify electro-pollution, definitely creates a stress response. Stimulates stress proteins, which is not necessarily bad. When you are exposed to a stressor, it's a very natural thing and builds the immune response. But it's when you are constantly exposed to a stressor that then the ability to respond is greatly diminished. And they found that it's cumulative across a lifetime of exposure. And where this really concerns me is that we're now getting unborn children who are being exposed. I came home one day at this place I was staying at, and there was a young girl who was a young lady who was about 7 months pregnant with a Wi-Fi laptop sitting on the bump, talking on a smartphone. And I just went ballistic. And this is, I didn't really go ballistic at her, but in my mind, I was just like, oh, how could you do that? And so we're seeing a massive blowout in chronic health with young children. And what are they going to be like when they get older? This is cumulative. And of course it leaves us more susceptible to all kinds of things. This is where I'm coming to now is really the area that George Carlo and I spoke about, and we had really, really interesting, really great conversation yesterday. And he really helped me significantly putting this presentation together. And this is his area that he's really doing a lot of research in. So I'll just sort of run through what we talked about. And I really hope that we can corroborate together and put in a really more, a larger, more interesting thing together for you. So membrane switching causes the genes to turn on and off, and this is, he really stressed that this is an adaptive capacity. And the unnatural frequencies cause the membranes to close down, and over time the cell learns that this is normal. And he actually said something to me that, what did he say? That when he was at medical school, they said that this is when they thought the cell went to sleep or something. I don't know if that's correct or not, it's just from memory. But this leads to a build-up of free radicals inside the cell and poor nutrition coming into the cell. So as that cell membrane shuts down, nutrients aren't coming in and the waste products are staying inside. And he quoted a reduction in cellular efficiency of down to about 60%. And that initiates structural changes, and those structural changes flow on to functional changes, and then that cascades down into the organism. And the weakened system will become compromised. And the thing that he really stressed, which I thought was really interesting, he really talked quite a bit about this. He said, this really validates, or is a valid explanation of how a single cause can create a multitude of problems. Because as this process happens, it's really, as it cascades down through the organism, it's the weakest thing that is going to come out and bite people, at least if I can put it that way, in very technical medical terms. And the other thing which I thought was really interesting, he's actually developed a lab test for this adaptive capacity, and it's the indicator is called MDA. I didn't write it down fast enough to get the full name, but I really hope that we can incorporate something and have George talk about this in more detail, because this is really, really groundbreaking stuff where he's at. DNA. Again, you guys should know lots about this, but from the perspective of electro-pollution, we'll just go through some stuff. It's very, very efficient conductor of electricity. It's the common building material that they're now using for nanotechnologies. And the DNA molecule is about 6 foot long, which I didn't know that. That really surprised me. I thought that was quite cool, actually. And because it's a coiled coil, it acts as a fractal antenna. And this makes it capable of picking up an incredibly wide range of signals, and it's very, very good antenna. And it's quite sensitive to EMF, more so than any of the other molecules, proteins and whatever. And also something I learned was that there's approximately 120,000 mistakes each time the cell divides, but there are repair mechanisms that correct this. So, it's a very, very complex process. And so, damage to DNA, some of the research that came out 2004, Drs. Lai and Singh, DNA breaks at 100 milligauss. Well, in your life, you'll come across 100 milligauss if you've got a bedside clock radio plugged in. You'll get between 100 and 200 milligauss right on top of a bedside clock radio. It drops off very, very quickly with distance, but there aren't too many things in your household that will give you 100 milligauss. That's one of them. Another thing is electric underfloor heating. The most I've ever measured in a home is over 500 milligauss with electric underfloor heating, and you can imagine I really don't recommend people have that. And there were young kids playing on this because it was a nice warm place for them to play. I say many other studies, including ones by George Carlo, found the genotoxic exposure from electropollution. And there was a study, I think it was 2012, where so initially, they were, as we were talking before, they were talking about some of the studies were just using the carrier wave. As the research has gone on, people have realised that they need to use cell phones or they need to use laptops. And this study in 2012 came out where they were using a laptop and they found significant damage to sperm. And I mean, one of the things that I kind of wonder about is that a lot of things like autism and chronic diseases, I've read somewhere that up to 80% of this is from paternal DNA damage. Well, I kind of wonder about people keeping a cell phone in their front pocket, men keeping a cell phone in their front pocket, whether that isn't a really significant factor in a lot of these chronic health issues that we're seeing. And these are some of the syndromes and diseases that EMF has been well implicated in. It's an extensive list, it really is. And before I go and measure somebody's home, I actually send them a questionnaire with a number of symptoms of electropollution. And just lately, a couple of times, I've had somebody underline almost everything on that list. There was one lady who said it was everything, and another lady, it was like 3/4 of the symptoms. And one of the things we found in one instance, in one house, the lady's bedroom, we're measuring 31 volts, and I'm looking for less than half a volt. 0.1 of a volt is good, but 31 volts AC standing in the floor of this lady's bedroom. 12, 13, 14 volts lying on her bed. And so what we're doing to remediate that is we're actually, it's in the process at the moment, the electricians are doing it, we're actually, all the wiring is under the floor. It's a wooden floor, and the wooden floor is a little bit conductive. So we're actually having the electricians put all of the electrical cabling under the house in metal sheathing or metal trunking. And by having earth metal trunking under the floor, those electric fields will drop away to almost nothing, we're hoping. It's the theory, and I believe it'll work really well. And when we found that, one area in the house was quite low, and so by turning off virtually all of the circuits in the house and her sleeping in the lounge, on a mattress in the lounge, she got the first full night's sleep she'd had for more than 6 years, I believe, or something like 6 years, and was beginning to feel like she was recovering and feeling better just within a relatively short space of time of being taken out of these very high electric fields. It's going to look now at some case studies and some other interesting things. Dr. Sam Millam was an epidemiologist in America, and he came up with a very interesting theory. And he firmly believes, and has some research to back this up, that a lot of what he calls the diseases of civilization, cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and suicide, can be attributed to some degree to the electrification, AC electrification. And I think that's quite an interesting thing. And it's very, very difficult in the modern world to actually have a control group that you can actually compare against now, because AC electrical power is ubiquitous. It's just everywhere. But in America, there's one group, the Old Order Amish, and they don't have any electricity. They don't use motor vehicles. It's horse and cart, and very, very everything's done by hand. And in the old order Amish, there's 40% less cancer. Diabetes is very, very low, and yet they still have the same profile for obesity as most of the rest of America. And ADD, ADHD is virtually unheard of in their children. And so this kind of lends a little bit of weight to this. And if we can just look at, firstly, at there's a lot on this graph, but if we can look at the bars first, and the blue bars are residential dwellings that have electrification. 1882, I think it was, they started with electrification. By 1900, there was significant electrification in most of the major cities on the eastern side of America. By 1920, you have about 35% of the homes in the whole country with electricity. And as you can see, that came up very quickly. But in the farms, and this is where we're looking at the difference between, in the farms, the uptake was very, very slow for electricity. And it wasn't until 1956 that we started to get somewhere near on par. And the green line is the trend line for that. And at the top in 1956, it's 99.2% of houses and farms have electricity. The interesting line is the red one. And this is, I've extrapolated this from some data, and I'll show you in the next slide how I actually got to that. But in 1920, you were 2.2 times more likely to die from cancer if you lived in an urban area than a rural area. And this is the kind of thing that Sam Millam found. And it was only by looking back through in America, they have very, very good death records from 1900 through, state by state. And he went through and he trolled through all of the stuff, and he found this real distinct correlation. And so, as you can see, as we get more and more electricity into the farm, the rate is starting to come back down. And of course, 1 is equivalent, no difference between farms and urban. And I would think that if I carry that trend line on a little bit further, you would see that from 1960 at 1.4, if we say we've got a 10 or 20 year lag, in another 20 years' time, I think it would be a lot closer. And so that's what he was basing it on. And how I came to those figures, this graph was not in his literature or in his publication, but I mean, I managed to find a couple of states that we could look at. Massachusetts, being an eastern state, had electricity very, very early on, and Louisiana, very, very poor southern state, that got electricity very late, especially into the rural areas. And just by comparing the death rates per 100,000, we get this ratio. And so I certainly, in my experience as I go and test people's homes, I definitely find that there's a correlation between exposure to AC electrical power and how people are feeling, and often in a very bad chronic way. Okay, and some of the things that Sam Millam did, I'll get through these really quick. You can read them quicker than I can say them, but this is the kind of research that he was doing, and he became reasonably well known for. One of the interesting ones was male breast cancer in office workers exposed to high magnetic fields, and this was quite a few years ago. And apparently there's a whole lot of guys work down in a basement right next to the electrical distribution system, and male breast cancer is on the rise, I guess. I guess it's something that's not really talked about, but apparently it is. And the very last one at the bottom, they, in conjunction with Dave Stetzer, who does the dirty electricity stuff, there was a library where they found they had very, very high rates of dirty electricity, incredibly high actually, and they monitored the level of neurotransmitters in these people's urine over a period of time. They put filters in to take out the dirty electricity, and as the people over a period of time, with the filters in place, their level of neurotransmitters in their urine dropped, which meant that they weren't excreting them. And this potentially is another interesting area where another effect that can potentially be seen as causing illness. And now we'll look at some studies on cell phone towers. In Brazil's third largest city, Belo Horizonte, they did a study looking at 856 cell phone towers, and they looked at where the person was living when they were diagnosed with cancer, and they geo-mapped that to the location of the cell phone towers, and then they also put the cell phone towers into the equation. And what they found was that 50% of the people lived within 100 metres of a cell phone tower, and 80% were less than 500 metres from a cell phone tower. And I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, I get to measure a number of cell phone towers, and the level that they were measuring when they were in the homes and testing this, they were measuring between 8,000 to 31,000 microwatts per square metre. That's the kind of levels that I measure in people's homes if they're relatively close to a cell phone tower. So, I mean, the measurements I think are realistic. The highest reading I've ever measured in somebody's home was in the top floor bedroom of a house which was about 30 or 40 metres away from a cell phone tower, and the cell phone tower was slightly downhill. So this bedroom was almost at eye height to the centre of the cell phone tower, and I measured 140,000 microwatts per square metre, which to me is outrageous. When I go into somebody's home and I'm measuring, I'm looking for less than 10 microwatts per square metre in a bedroom. And in a general living area, less than 100 if possible. So when we start getting these high figures, I can really see how people are negatively reacting to it. But the New Zealand standard is 10 million microwatts. And so there's a real disconnect between what we see causing biological effect and what the legislation is. I'll touch on that a little bit later. And who's got one of these? Show of hands, come on, everybody. Okay, well, I hate to tell you, but at 2 metre distance from a cell phone base station is the equivalent of being 100 to 200 metres from a cell phone tower. Okay, you have a mini cell phone tower in your home. Okay, this is one of the very first things I get people to remove. Okay, another cell phone tower study. It's over a 10-year period. They started in June 1993 when the tower was installed. What they call the inner area was less than 400 metres from the tower, outer area over 400 metres. The inner area was 100 times stronger than the outer area, and it was a very carefully constructed analysis, and they worked with the 3 local doctors in this town. And first 5 years, no real significant difference between the 2 areas, but in the second year, 3.4 times the risk of breast cancer, and the average age was significantly lower than the average age of the outer area, from 50.8 to 69.9. And overall, there was a 2 times greater risk of cancer. And this is the graph that they had in the report. The first 2 bars are the averages for the region and the town. But I think the second 2 bars are really telling, because the inner area to the outer area. Now, imagine if everybody was living in the outer area. That would be at least the start.
These are raw numbers, not rates.
Sorry?
Do we know how many people?
There's something like, I think there's about 1,000 people living in the town, I think, from memory. That's a rate. That's an adjusted rate.
How many people lived in each area?
I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can certainly give you a link to that to this study paper. Okay, so this is something that's really kind of interesting, which you don't often get to see, and this is, I have some equipment that can geo-map onto a map and the height of the bar is the height of the microwave radiation. And so for those of you that know Remio Road, you can see where the cell phone towers are. This one out here, there's a Montessori preschool right in the midst of that. That's the shops on West Tamaki Road. And if you drive along the waterfront's pretty strong. The tallest bar is about 30,000 microwatts. So electrosensitivity, I think, I'll just put this up all in one go, but I'd really ask you guys to be more sympathetic to people that come into you that have these kind of symptoms. The common held belief is that electrosensitivity is a psychiatric problem. Believe me, it is not. I deal with electrosensitive people all the time. This is a real physical issue for these people. Some people cannot live in their home with the electricity turned on. They can't bear to go out into the community. They can't go to the library. They can't go on a bus in Auckland. They can't go on a train because there's Wi-Fi and microwave radiation everywhere. And one of the things I'd really like to get across to you is if you get people coming in, please understand that this is a real issue for these people and try and be sympathetic to them because it's incredibly difficult for them to live in this kind of, with this syndrome. And Dr. Magda Havis is a lady that's done a lot of research on this, and what we're trying to show here is that there are people that are non-reactive and people that are reactive, and this was an electrosensitive person. And when the cordless phone was turned on, the phone base was turned on, they had a distinct physical reaction to it. And these are some of the symptoms and the proximity to a cell phone tower that people with electro-hypersensitivity sort of reported. And so it's a very, very broad range of symptoms. Okay, the birds and the bees. In America in particular, they're having a real problem with migratory birds flying into power lines. And they believe it's because it disrupts their magnetic compass. We've heard a lot about colony collapse disorder, and I believe that pesticides and pollutants are an issue, but I suspect that electro-pollution is possibly a lot bigger part of this issue than people believe. There was one study done where they had 8 hives, and they put cell phone base stations in 4 of those hives, and nothing in the others. In the 4 hives that had the cell phone base stations in them, also cordless phone base stations in them, 3 of them only had 20 to 30% of the bees return. One of the hives had no bees return whatsoever. And this is just from having a cordless phone base station sitting in the hive. It really seems to mess with their ability to navigate. And also damage to trees and plants. Another movie I'd recommend is one called Resonance, Beings of Frequency. If you've never heard of this or you've never seen it, you can see it on YouTube. It's a really amazing movie, very, very good. And this is an American smart meter, and you can see that these plants just don't want to be around this thing. Okay, legislation. I'll briefly go through this. 2006 classified as electric and magnetic fields classified as a 2B carcinogen. 2011 we had microwave radiation classified as a 2B carcinogen, and Leonard Hardell, who was one of the main people presenting information, the epidemiological information, he is of the firm opinion that it should be a class 1 carcinogen, and there is a group of them that are really pushing for it to be a 2A carcinogen. And even at that time, when that was voted on, there was quite a vocal group that wanted it as a 2A carcinogen back in 2011. And unfortunately, we're seeing the beginnings of a major PR campaign by the corporates to have that 2B classification dropped. Russia, China, Italy have standards 100 times lower than we have in New Zealand. Their standard is still high, but it's 1,000 microwatts per square metre as opposed to our 10 million. Switzerland and Ukraine are even lower. And it really distresses me to see that our own Ministry of Education has just very, very recently published a study saying that Wi-Fi in schools is absolutely 100% totally safe. And I really don't understand how they can do this. But based on the New Zealand standards, they're actually correct. But I really think it's wonderful that we're a country that has lots and lots of beaches, so that these guys can go around and stick their heads in the sand. It's just unbelievable. This is a report that just came out very, very recently, and at the moment we've got something like about 14 million new cases of cancer worldwide each year, and they're predicting that in the next 20 years it's almost going to double to 22 million cases, and 70% of that increase is going to be in Africa, Asia, and Central and South America. And in this report, it was a major report, they said the risk factors are tobacco, alcohol, obesity, physical inactivity. Anybody seen the elephant in the room? no mention of electro-pollution whatsoever. And even though this is an IARC report, and the IARC classified as a 2B carcinogen, and Dr. Christopher Weil, the guy that was giving this presentation, was on the committee that voted for this. So, and when asked why it wasn't considered, there was no new evidence which suggests there any cause for concern. And there were more than 16,000 studies. Actually, George Carlo told me it's more like 18,000 now. And 6,000 of those studies link electro-pollution to 122 biological effects. Government and industry use this weight of evidence thing. And the tobacco industry started that long, long time ago in the 20s. Hill and Knowlton it was. They came up with a strategy of just causing some level of confusion about what it is. And by doing that, they just allowed the whole thing to carry on. And our standards in New Zealand don't have any, they very clearly state they take no biological effect into consideration. If you haven't read the Bio-Initiative report, I really strongly suggest you do. And you can see some of the latest research, genetic effects. 65% of the studies are showing that. And so, I mean, you can read that. There's significant research, especially the stuff that's coming out lately, that is showing very, very definite effects. And I'll just zoom through this really quick because we're running out of time. But basically, the tactics that the industry take are really that they go on the internet and they with bloggers and they discredit people, unsubstantiated things that really discredit these very, very good researchers. They cut funding, and a number of these people, virtually all those people I've mentioned up there, have all had their research cut and they've all been basically sacked. Darius Lazinski was one of the last ones. I think end of this year he got sacked from his university post in Finland. And it's what they call a product defence strategy. If they can just create doubt, and the government and everybody just then goes, oh, there's some doubt, so we'll let it go. And another really excellent movie, it's only just recently come out, is called Microwaves, Science and Lies. I really, really recommend you watch this movie. It's absolutely superb. It's a French movie with English subtitles. Okay, our current understanding of EMF, I like cars, and so I've used this as a bit of an analogy. The current state of our understanding is like that car. It's got a reasonably big engine, it can go reasonably fast for its time, has no brakes on the front wheels, no seat belts. If you hit something, you're going to do damage to you and who you hit. Where we need to be, and so there's no recognition of risk in that vehicle, okay? It's just, we're flat out, we're developing, we're doing all the things that we can because we can. And what do we have in a modern vehicle? We have an acceptance that there is a risk. And I'm not anti-technology, our world would collapse without it. But what I firmly believe is that we need to get the scientists who are developing this stuff to accept that there is a risk and start developing products that take that risk into account. Our modern car is a terrific example of this. We have all manner of things built in there to reduce the risk. And rather than the technology just being hell-bent on moving forward, if we can encourage people to do that, we can make things a lot safer. These are some books that I've been reading or have read or I've used in putting this together. George Carlo's one at the end. Overpowered by Martin Blank is a terrific book. It's only just come out. Take Back Your Power and Microwave Science and Lies, the two at the bottom, movies. Highly recommend them. They're very, very good. And some web references. Bio-Initiative report, definitely. I believe my slides are going to be sent on to everybody, so you don't have to write all this stuff down. And that's me. So thank you very much. I don't know if anybody's got any questions, if we've got time. Or
Yeah, well, no, we do have time, and we'll have one or two directed to Paul, and then we're going to have our panel up, and we're going to have questions to everyone. So Yeah, starting back, David.
Paul, what sort of technologies are you using, or are there any you can use to help protect us?
Really interesting kind of question. I don't believe, and I think protection is a word that is bandied around a lot, and I don't believe that there's anything that provides protection per se, because protection implies safety, and I don't believe that devices, chips on cell phones, stick-on things on cell phones and various devices like that, I don't believe that they provide safety. What I do think they do is they may harmonise the biofield to some degree, and I think that's helpful. For some people that's helpful. Secondary issue is that a lot of these things, because we're talking about harmonics, I think a lot of these things, people can actually get sensitised to the harmonics in them. And so what I recommend people do is, my philosophy is you measure first, you remediate conventionally as much as you possibly can. If you want to use any of these devices, go ahead, because they shouldn't do any harm at that point, and they may help. And the fourth and final thing is that if you do use any of these devices, you should take them out of your personal environment once a month or once every 2 months, and keep them out for a week or so, and then reintroduce them in the same way that you challenge for food allergies, because there's potential you could actually become sensitized to those frequencies, and gradually they could actually be making you worse. So that's my kind of answer on that one.
Yep. Problem I can see is diagnosis. Now, some years ago, a local lawyer in Tauranga came to see me with a 2-year history of memory loss, mental confusion, headaches and chronic fatigue. Not very good for a lawyer. He'd been to 6 doctors, including 2 specialists, neurologists, psychiatrists. None of them could help him. I used EAV. I've been doing it for decades. And I picked up there that he had electromagnetic stress. I lent him my Gauss meter and told him to check the wall at the head of his bed, because I suspected that that's what was affecting him. And sure enough, he got a very high reading. He moved his bed 2 feet to the side, and within a fortnight, he was perfectly all right. And that's when he remembered that he'd moved his bed to that part of the wall shortly before it happened.
Yeah.
Now, I would not have been able to diagnose anything without EAV. But even though GPs ought to have Gauss meters to lend to patients, that's not going to pick up the radiation from a cell phone.
No.
It doesn't. How do we check on that?
Well, the solution to that I would like to propose to everybody is that you clone me. In other words, you encourage a lot more people to do what I do. And there's one doctor in America, Dr. Klinghardt, and one of the things he does is he actually has somebody with my competency go and check somebody's home first before he actually prescribes it to them. So what I'd like to suggest, and it's a really, really good point, is that we need to be very, very aware of people's environments, and you need people doing what I do. And at the moment, there are 3 people that have got building biology qualifications that I know of that are doing this in New Zealand, and there's a couple of other people that have some qualification they're also doing. So there's probably 5 or 6 people in New Zealand doing what I do. I would like to see there's a person with my capabilities attached to a group of medical clinics, and it's the kind of thing that people need to do before you begin looking at their symptoms. And because if you can fix what's happening in their homes, and I have to tell you, every home that I go into, virtually, I can find significant things that I can improve. This is almost universal. And the really bad cases where this woman with 31 volts in her bedroom, and that was having a massive effect on her health. And she lived in this beautiful home, and the toss-up was, do we move home or do we fix it? And in the end, because it was such a lovely place, they fixed it. And I believe that she'll have a significant improvement. But coming back to your thing, it is an incredibly difficult thing to diagnose from your perspective. But maybe take a step back and encourage people to be doing what I'm doing. There are very, very few of us, and there need to be a lot more. Because if you can find this problem before it gets to you, then you can really do what you do and have great effect, and have, you know, hopefully great response.
I just wondered with the tri-field meters, which have got microwave on them, whether they or whether there's some other technology that we can have, because obviously there is only one of you, or maybe three in Auckland, and I'm 200 miles south of here, so
Yep.
it's not much good to me. So are there some devices that we could use? Is a tri-field meter, for instance?
Tri-field meter is great for magnetic fields. It's so-so for electric fields, and it's pretty hopeless for, I think, for electro-pollution or microwave radiation. There are some meters which, there's a little meter called a cornet, and it's about 200 US. And that's, the problem is we're looking at 4 things, and you need to have 4 meters to measure the 4 things, and then there's 4 different kinds of remediation for each of those 4 things. It becomes very complex. But there are relatively inexpensive meters that can give you an idea of what's going on. I mean, I probably have more than $20,000 worth of equipment. And
Like a little radiation meter that we could give people, you know, there's something they could wear around their neck for a week or something, and then it could be posted off to you, and you can see, well, this person's been exposed to.
there's nothing like that at the moment, but it's a terrific idea. It really is. I mean, the devices, the data log, are the really expensive ones. You know, I showed you that map on there with the measurements of the cell phone towers. You know, to be able to do that, it's quite sophisticated gear. Yeah.
Microwave ovens?
Incredibly bad. And with the meter I use for measuring microwave radiation, it has a sound so you can actually hear. And whenever I go into somebody's home and I say, look, would you like to hear what your microwave oven sounds like? Once they've heard it, they never want to use it ever again because it really, really sounds gross. And you need to be 8, 10, 12, 15 metres away from a microwave oven to be even mildly safe. You know, it's not like step away, it's like leave the room or leave the house. Quite absolutely.
At the back.
Sorry,
Rather than Wi-Fi at home, would you recommend being plugged in then?
absolutely. In my house, I'm not, as I said, I'm not against technology. We've got 5 or 6 computers at home, and it's all done by Cat6 cabling, and that's great. It's completely safe. It's better, more secure, and that's, you know, one of the first things I recommend when I generally go to somebody's house is get rid of the cordless phone and plug in and turn off the Wi-Fi at the router and at the computer. It's really important you turn it off at both places.
What can you do if you live within 100 metres, say, a cell phone tower down the road?
That's really tricky. And it really depends, because I was at a house the other day and they were just livening up the cell phone tower the day I was there, and I managed to get some quite good readings, and the house was a little bit behind a tin roof on another house, and even though they were very close, that tin roof was reflecting a lot of it away. If you can look out a window and see a cell phone tower, it's bad.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one simple thing that you can do. If you can't see it out the window, possibly not so bad, but it's only by measuring. And this is the real difficult thing. Unless you actually measure, you don't know.
There's no counter device to shield your house.
Well, I mean, you can use shielding paint, and there's window films that are metallized window films that will reflect it. There's curtaining material. There's canopies that you can sleep in. There's a lot of things you can do, but they're quite expensive. Yeah.
Lady there.
Oh, and with the turn off the Wi-Fi in your house,
Yep.
where we live, I can pick up 3 or 4 other people's Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and
Anything you can do about that?
beyond shielding your house, no, but I guess the thing I would say is that they'll probably be really weak. Wi-Fi drops off very, very quickly with distance, and if you can see them, it's not great, but they're probably not outrageously strong, unless the houses are very, very close to you. And the same with smart meters. You know, we're being surrounded by smart meters all over the place. You can get the transmitting modem taken out of your smart meter, and that's great, really recommend it, but you've got them all around you as well. So talk to your neighbours. You know, I've even had instances where I've had people buy new cordless phones for their neighbours, so that there's one cordless phone that doesn't transmit when you hang it up, and so to reduce what they were getting, they actually upgraded their neighbours' stuff for them. I mean, you know, there's things you can do. I'm kind of in favour of earthing, and I'm kind of not. And it takes what I'm finding that the New Zealand electrical system, and what that does is that all of the neutral wires, the black wires, connect to a neutral bar, and all the green earth wires connect to an earth bar at the circuit board. But those two bars are bonded together. So if there is an imbalance in the neutral circuits in the house, it actually gets transferred to the earth system and then goes on all of the earth wires. And if your house, like mine actually has that, and this is something I've only been finding very, very recently, measuring houses with oscilloscopes and very, very fine equipment. And what I'm finding is that in some instances, if the neutral is imbalanced, you're actually going to get currents on the earth system then going into the earthing mat or earthing blanket or earthing sheet potentially. But if you take it to a stake outside, which is what I plan on doing at my house, is I'm going to put in a secondary earth stake and run to that. Generally, I think earthing is a good thing, but it's not a magic bullet, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not guaranteed that it's going to be good in every instance. And this is the kind of thing I'm struggling with at the moment, because I actually work with the guys that import the earthing stuff, and it's a really, really difficult thing, because unless you've got a very sensitive E-field meter, you're not going to know whether it's actually going to be good or bad. So it's kind of, yes, it's good, but with some care.
Right, one last question in the back, I think. Yeah. Okay.
What are your thoughts on power pylons compared to phone?
They're definitely dangerous. There's no doubt about it. But the magnetic fields drop off a lot quicker. And so if you're 30, 40, 50 metres away from a major power pylon, the magnetic fields should be pretty low. But in some of the research, they're finding increases in Alzheimer's within a kilometre increases. So, but generally, I find that magnetic fields drop off relatively quickly, whereas a cell phone tower, the way the antenna works, you actually have sort of almost like valences of strength. Underneath the tower, it'll be relatively strong. You'll come out, you'll get a really strong patch, then it'll be a little bit weaker, then you get another strong patch. And it's the way the antenna comes out, and also the declination of the antenna, whether it's how much it's pointing down or up, or there's so many things. But generally, I would say that cell phone towers are significantly more dangerous than overhead power lines. But you wouldn't want to be close to either.
Paul, I think it's time to bring your talk to an end, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
So stay here, because we're going to be trying to now, it's panel time.
A microwave in the house. Do you have any really good resources I can show to them to prove that microwaves are bad?
YouTube's always your friend. I'm sure there's some good stuff on YouTube, but beyond going to a friend's house and me taking my meter and letting them hear it, it's difficult. I mean, it's such a convenience thing, but one thing I'd say about microwave ovens, when they first came out, I don't know if you're aware, they're actually banned in Russia. For a number of years, the Russians considered them to be far too dangerous. And it wasn't until glasnost and commercial pressures came on they actually brought them in. But so, you know, it's a difficult one.
Well, the problem is that the advertisement of the new one says they're now very safe. It's not like the old ones. Not
No, I measure. You know, it doesn't matter what brand, Bosch or hopefully I don't get sued for that. But you know, even the very high quality better ones, no.
If they're turned off, are they safe for all of these things?
Yeah, if the switch is off at the wall. Yeah.
Pulled out?
That whole thing, you often see, especially in American literature, they say you have to pull the cord out. That's because a lot of the electrical sockets in America don't have a switch. It's only you plug it in to go and you pull it out to stop. So typically, just turning the switch off is okay. Yeah.
I have another question for Paul. At the beginning of your presentation, you said that the most dangerous frequencies are between 1.7 kilohertz and 100 kilohertz. Does that mean that like the household appliances operating at 50 hertz are relatively safe?
No. I mean, it's all a degree of distance that you are from them, and it's the household appliances that generally cause dirty electricity. And so it depends, because we're looking at 4 different aspects of electropollution. It depends what aspect you look at as to, and I mean, this is a really long, I could give you a very long answer to this, but I'll try not to. But it's proximity for electric fields, magnetic fields also. Dirty electricity goes right through the whole house if it's a bad appliance.
Right, so what's your opinion then on using like a far infrared sauna? So you're sitting pretty close,
I mean, anything in moderation is relatively okay, I think. You know, it's long-term chronic exposure, which is normally really bad. You know, something like that is really, you're using it as a therapeutic tool, right? Let's hope it's good. I mean, I guess I come back to this one all the time. It's like the most important thing is to measure. Yeah.